The Japanese agricultural empire, how they built and lost California. Legal Aliens Episode 3. When most people imagine Japanese immigration, they think of sushi, samurais, and cherry blossoms. Not strawberries, celery, irrigation ditches, and land leases. Yet by the 1800s, tens of thousands of Japanese men and women boarded ships for faraway lands such as Peru, Brazil, Guam, Hawaii, and even the continental United States. And in California, these Japanese immigrants built one of the most powerful agricultural systems in American history. Today we ask, why did the Japanese leave home? What were they hoping to achieve? How did they build an agricultural empire in California? Why were American laws created specifically to stop them? And how did they rebuild again after losing everything during World War II? If you like this content, please like, share, and subscribe. I'm Ray, and welcome to Legal Aliens. Why did the Japanese leave home? To understand the Japanese exodus, we must first look at Japan's transformation after 1868, the Meiji Restoration. For more than 250 years, Japan lived in isolation under the Tokugawa shogunate. When Commodore Perry's black ships arrived in the 1850s, Japan had little choice but to modernize at lightning speed. Railroads were constructed, industries expanded, military conscription became obligatory, and compulsory education became mandatory. But progress came with pain. The land tax reform of 1873 overhauled Japan's taxation system. For the first time, private land ownership was legally recognized, replacing the old feudal system. But the reform carried heavy consequences. Taxes were collected in cash, as a portion of the harvest, a crushing burden for rural farmers. As agriculture mechanized, thousands lost work. Because new industrial sectors could not yet be heavily taxed, the cost of modernization fell almost entirely on the countryside. Rural taxes rose sharply to fund factories, railroads, and military expansion. Meanwhile, economic pressures worsened. Between 1880 and 1895, rice prices collapsed by nearly 40%, while Japan's population surged from 34 million to 45 million. Villagers faced shrinking incomes, rising debt, crop failures, and widespread land loss. 日本では田畑が狭く、人口が多く、生活が苦しい. In Japan, land is small, the people many, and life is hard. The government quietly encouraged immigration as a safety valve. The Immigration Company Law of 1894 legalized licensed labor agencies, sending workers first to Guam's and Hawaii's sugar plantations, then to the U.S. West Coast. So what exactly were Japanese immigrants hoping to achieve in the United States? For the Issei, the first generation, the answer was simple: economic survival, stable work, and upward mobility that Japan's rigid society often denied. In rural Japan, land loss, rising taxes, and falling crop prices created generational instability. But overseas, Japanese migrants saw a chance to control their own future. Let's break this down. In California, Japanese immigrants worked in railroads, agriculture, fishing, canneries, and small business. According to the 1910 U.S. Census, more than 70% of Japanese workers on the West Coast were employed in agriculture. For the first time, they could save real money. By 1905, remittances from Hawaii and the U.S. totaled 4.8 million USD, more than 150 million today. Remittances became the lifeline for rural Japanese villages. 我々は一生懸命働き、家族に仕送りを送る。それが日本人の誇りである. We work with all our strength and send money home. That is the pride of the Japanese. In Japan's strict hierarchy, mobility was limited, but abroad, Japanese migrants became farm foremen, small plot landowners, fishermen, merchants, leaseholders, restaurant owners, and boarding housekeepers. Most Issei dreamed of returning home after earning enough, but as restrictions tightened, many brought wives through picture marriages and settled permanently. How did they build California's agricultural empire? When the Japanese reached California, they entered an agricultural system in chaos. Land was cheap, labor was short, large white-owned ranches were inefficient, many crops were unprofitable, and the Central Valley needed massive irrigation solutions. The Issei changed everything. They turned barren land into gold. Japanese farmers introduced intensive techniques imported from rural Japan: precision irrigation, hand cultivation, multi-cropping, season-by-season soil management, cooperative labor pooling, family-based farming units. Land that white farmers abandoned became some of the most productive acreage in America. They revolutionized crop production. According to the California State Board of Agriculture, between 1920 and 1922, Japanese farmers dominated 70% of California's strawberry industry, 80% of celery production, 90% of certain truck crops in Los Angeles County, major shares of tomatoes, peppers, cut flowers, and nursery crops. They climbed the economic ladder record speed, from laborers to tenants, tenants to leaseholders, leaseholders to foremen, foremen to landowners, and landowners to agricultural moguls. By 1820, Issei farmers owned or leased almost 450,000 acres. This success triggered resentment and panic. White farmers accused the Japanese of being too efficient, too competitive, and impossible to beat, which brings us to the backlash. So how did the Japanese lose their agricultural empire in California? Relations between Japanese and non-Japanese were complicated. At first, Japanese workers were praised for their discipline and efficiency. But as their numbers grew, 127,000 in Hawaii and 80,000 on the U.S. mainland, by 1910, resentment exploded. The first blow, the Gentleman's Agreement of 1907. Japan agreed to stop issuing passports to laborers bound to the U.S., and the U.S. promised not to restrict Japanese already present. The second blow, the California Alien Land Law of 1913. It banned immigrants ineligible for citizenship from owning land or long-term leases. Asians were the only ones ineligible. Japanese families and their U.S.-born children to hold land titles. So California just passed more laws. Hakujin wa warera o soreteru. Warera wa kinmei ni hataraku karada. The white man fears us because we work too hard. A Japanese labor organizer, 1913. The third blow, the Alien Land Law of 1920, banned sharecropping, leasing, guardianships, and crop contracts. Still, the Japanese adapted. The fourth blow, the Immigration Act of 1920, completely banned Japanese immigration, freezing the Issei population permanently. Despite the legal barriers, by 1930, Japanese farmers still controlled nearly 30% of California's vegetable production. And then came the final blow, World War II. After Pearl Harbor, 120,000 Japanese Americans, two-thirds of which were U.S. citizens, were imprisoned in camps. They lost farms, homes, businesses, savings, and land built over 40 years. Estimated losses exceed $3 billion in today's value. Yet, even under hardship, they preserved community life. They built Buddhist temples, Japanese schools, established newspapers like Rafu Shinpo, and farming cooperatives. So what did Japanese contribute to the United States? After incarceration, Japanese Americans rebuilt again. In agriculture, by 1950, they reclaimed major roles in the produce markets. They dominated nursery crops and cut flower industries, and created influential post-war agricultural cooperatives. In education, by 1980, 40% of Japanese Americans held college degrees, nearly double that of the U.S. average. In culture and innovation, they introduced bonsai, sushi, martial arts, Japanese gardens, cultural traditions that shape American identity today, and contributed national figures like Minoru Yamasaki, the architect of the World Trade Center, or Ellison Onizuka, a NASA astronaut. So how did the Japanese rebuild and lose California? Through discipline, innovation, and a belief that dignity comes from hard work. They transformed deserts into farmland, reshaped the West Coast economy, and built a farming empire unmatched in American history. And even when the laws took everything from them, lands, rights, and freedom, they rebuilt again. I'm Ray, and this is Legal Aliens. And if this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Arigato, and see you next time.